Good morning here in Silicon Valley. Good morning, good afternoon. If you're watching this out there on the World Wide Web, our next general session promised you this morning, didn't I, that we would be hearing from Dell on this main stage, and here we are to hear from Michael Coté. This whole lot of hot air thing, Michael, I'm hoping you're going to disabuse us of that thought. Come on, let's give it up, please, for Michael Coté.
Well, hello, everybody. I've seen how strict the deadlines are around here, so I'll try to keep it right on time. At least I get ejected from the bowl. So I've been working at Dell for a little over a year now. And before that, I was at a little analyst firm called Redmonk, and I was a developer before that. And like a lot of you, when I was on the outside of Dell, I was curious about what exactly Dell was up to in the cloud space. And now that I've come into Dell and worked on software for a little while, and now that I work on strategy for the cloud, I wanted to share with you guys sort of some insights into what I've found out and actually been starting helping with us being Dell, working on in the cloud space. And to start doing that, the way that I wanted to kind of piece together this presentation was one, to start talking about how you can start applying cloud and how you can kind of check yourself and think about how cloud is working out or not working out for you. And so, you know, back when I was an analyst and in the work that I do nowadays, I'm always thinking about how technology is used and what benefits it gets someone. When I was a programmer, I liked to just gratuitously do stuff because it was fun, whether or not it was a good idea or not. But nowadays, I'm a lot more focused on the actual practical use for it. So I'm always asking this kind of question, whatever the shiny object du jour may be, if you've gotten further enough along your journey and if you've been benefiting from it, whatever that may be. And so nowadays, when I think about cloud, there's kind of two poles that are the extreme ends of a gradient of what it benefits you from. And if you remember, cloud started out basically just being cheap, or affordable, as my wife tells me I should stay instead. And essentially what that means is that because of the technologies and practices that you use, you can end up doing similar or just good enough things that you would be doing with more expensive technologies. And so in IT, especially in recent years, you always want things to be more affordable because you're running out of budget and you know, you're having the thumb screws put on you to make things cheaper, essentially, or again, more affordable. Or, as other people like to say, get more value out of it. Now, on the other end, and what I get excited about cloud for, and a lot of what I'll spend some time talking about here, is not only are there certain cost savings or efficiencies that you'll get, but there's actual ways of being innovative with it and doing something with your business. Being able to actually be someone who's helping the business create value and not a hassle, like most people picture the IT department being. Me being a former developer, I'm always, you know, a little upset about sysadmins and infrastructure and why they're a roadblock for just getting interesting things done. And of course, you know, sysadmins are always thinking of developers as the people who write all the bugs that cause things to slow down. So there's this exciting detente between the two of them. But in thinking about how you're applying cloud to business and trying to do something with it, I think keeping those two poles in mind is always very important. If you can get one of those, then that's a great benefit because, you know, freeing up money or meeting budget is, no one dislikes that. And if you can actually do something with IT, with the IT department, and say that, you know, now instead of being just a cost center or sort of a black hole of email and things going down all the time, you, the business, or the rest of the company can actually look at us, the IT department, or the IT provider, as a weapon, if you will, or I don't know what a non-militaristic thing, a tool that you can use to do something interesting and new with your business. So we being Dell, did a study, or commissioned a study, I should say, with the Economist Intelligence Unit last year. And there's a lot of different charts and findings and fancy pictures of people staring in the air, holding pins and things like that in there. But this is one chart that was particularly interesting. And why I wanted to call it this chart in this context of these two poles of cloud is that you know, you often get in the position of innovation is expensive, and we can't control costs and be innovative at the same time. So when I came across this chart in reading that study, it was interesting because if you look at it, at least the way that I read it, is that people who are focused on using IT to drive revenue, and arguably most of how you would drive revenue is by doing something new or different, that is by innovating, maybe not in all cases, but instead of being focused purely on cutting costs, they're focused on driving revenue. And if you look at this chart, what's interesting is that the people who are focused on driving revenue are, even in the extreme case of when it comes to cutting costs, are satisfied, or as it says below, they think that they're doing an effective or a very effective job in cutting costs. So you look at this on the on y'all's left side, basically, and you can see that there's companies who are very comfortable with being innovative and cutting costs at the same time. And then you move over to the right side, and it swings more towards the innovative side. And obviously, people who are focused only on cutting costs are not always so excited about their ability to innovate or do something interesting and new with their technology. So, I like to think of what's going on here, and it's hard to know how much of this is caused by cloud versus just ongoing improvements in IT and the way people are doing things. But it's very possible to look at IT to have this efficient innovation, to sort of have your cake and eat it too. And whether it's a cupcake or a cake or a pie, to have multiple layers of frosting or maybe some a la mode on the side with it. And so narrowing down to cloud. So if you're in this position of thinking, I want to start using cloud and more generally IT to help drive business strategies, right? And to help do something more than just keeping the lights on, which is a big focus of Dell, right? We're always known as, we've always been known as the very pragmatic, practical systems, hardware, laptop people who just sort of give you the goods that help run your business. And to some extent, we've been helping keep the lights on for a long time. And what we've been doing recently, and part of the reason that I came to join Dell is we're starting to figure out what to do underneath those light bulbs a lot more and help companies out with that. And when it comes to cloud, this is one of our major opportunities and the major areas that we're playing in to do something beyond just light bulb management, as it were. And when I look at cloud, the area that I'm focused on nowadays, there's kind of these 4 buckets of how you start thinking about how do I apply cloud, and how do I, an IT person, have the mindset that allows me to think about using cloud as that tool that really helps drive business and innovation, not just cut costs. And the first cluster to look at down there is what I would call agility. And agility is really one of the ways of thinking about innovation or time to market or speed or just the ability to get things to market faster, to come up with new features, test them out, and get them into your end user's hands or your customer's hands to get some feedback and try it out. Like essentially, unless you have a fair amount of agility or a fair amount of time, you don't really have the ability to innovate too much in today's world, because you've got to get things out quickly and be testing things out and always have stuff going out there. And if you think about a lot of the consumer apps that you use, where a lot of cloud stuff comes from, they're always coming out with new features, and that's why they're always, at least for me personally, interesting and encouraging to use. Like once some app that I'm using kind of dies, if you will, I kind of lose interest in it and I move on to something else. And there's not always, as an end user, whether you're at home or whether you're in a business context, you kind of have the same motivations. And I don't know about you, but the last time I had to fill out like my HR paperwork, I sure wish they were a lot more agile and adding new features and being nicer in the enterprise software area. So another area when you're thinking about how you apply cloud is to think about the ubiquity that cloud inherently brings you. And this is kind of a, if you think about it too shallowly, it's kind of a no-brainer. Like a lot of cloud, as we think about it, though not all, as we'll get into, is running on the public internet. So by virtue of being on the public internet, it's available anywhere, if you will. But I think when you're an IT department working in a large business, you need to think about how the dynamics of the services or the applications or whatever you're providing changes so that you can take advantage of this ubiquity. And here, all of these things are pretty much interrelated. If there was a four-dimensional coin, if you will, these would be sides of the same coin to have wonky talk there. But essentially, once you have ubiquity and you have agility, you can see how these things layer on, that if your customers can access your services at any time, then you want to constantly be coming up with things for them to do or ways of improving your service. Whether you're a consumer service or you're an insurance company or a retail banker or something like that, if your customers are always going to be fiddling with your application, then you need to give them something to fiddle with, or they're kind of stop fiddling with it. And once you lose those eyeballs, as we used to cause it, then things aren't as interesting as they could be. And for most contexts, you'll be dealing with end users. And so the third bucket to start thinking about how should I structure the strategy of how I apply cloud is efficiency. And this gets to that pole of cost savings or affordability or cheapness that I was talking about earlier. And not only does it get to cutting costs that certain cloud technologies can bring you if you're lucky enough to be able to replace your older systems with cloud technologies. And by lucky there, I mean that the technology works and it's compatible and there's not some other constraints that prevent you from doing that. But there's another interesting concept, again, that layers on with agility and ubiquity, as you'll see, that that it's interesting to start thinking about, and that is this idea of renting a supercomputer, if you will. And back down in Austin, there's this little fun name startup called not Monkey Brains. That's a local place here, but InfoChimps. I'm getting my Simian stuff mixed up. But the InfoChimps guys, they started out being a data marketplace, and now they're Hadoop and big data specialists. And they have I think he's CTO there, one of the founder guys. This guy, Flip. It's an excellent name. And he had this quote, which I'm going to get wrong, but he said, nowadays, you can rent a supercomputer for $50 for 3 hours, right? And what he meant by that very technically, or down tactically, was you really can spin up a huge parallel cluster, like the kind of thing when I was in high school, we would, like telnet into some crazy JPL supercomputer to render out those, spherical chrome balls with unicorns next to them kind of thing. But nowadays, you can basically rent a supercomputer for as long or as little as you need. And so, again, this is a shiny object syndrome thing, but it's a good example of thinking about the business context of all of this. So when I look at Dell's community, we span from individuals to what we call small businesses, to mid-sized businesses, to gigantic large enterprises, just all across the market. And if you're in the high end of the market, you pretty much can afford whatever you may need. I mean, that's an overstatement. But if you need to do some business intelligence or some deep analytics, you can justify pretty easily what the expense that you need to do that crunching. Now, if you're in the mid and the smaller size of the market, the idea of being able to do like data analytics at the scale of Citibank or a gigantic entity, Home Depot or someone like that, has traditionally been out of reach. But this idea that you could just rent a supercomputer to do your parallel data processing, now that means that if you're in these smaller companies where that was out of your price category, you can start thinking about how you could use that. And that's a big, but just one example of how you can start using the efficiency that cloud brings to do new business strategies. And then finally, in somewhat of a counterintuitive area, what I'm increasingly seeing when we are coming up with our cloud strategies and products and talking with our customers and our community and seeing them use it is, if done properly, which is always a big proviso on everything, that there's actually a huge amount of control that you reintroduce into IT with cloud. And a lot of that comes down to much of the cloud transformation that I see people going through is, it starts out as rogue IT or people with credit cards doing crazy things, but very quickly it gets centralized in a way that didn't always happen in the past. And centralization was always a big point of IT, but it was also a really big annoyance, right? That you would have this single point of control, you would have the help desk you would have to go through, and IT was really like the masters of no and slowness. But because of the self-service element and the automation that underpins and supports that with cloud, resting or gently putting in this control that the IT department really needs to make sure that things are running efficiently, and that gives you the ubiquity, and also it gives them the agility needed to run business strategies, is something that increasingly I see a benefit of cloud. So those are 4 things when you're thinking about how you apply cloud in a business context, what I would call sort of like principles to think about. Like, those are kind of end effects that cloud helps bring you, and so they're good guidelines for thinking about how you craft them to the business. So at Dell, there's basically 3 tenets when we're thinking about providing a simpler path to cloud, which is essentially, to be blunt, our thing when it comes to cloud, right? Like, we know lots of people who have, and we work with lots of people who have sort of a, if we're saying we're the simplest path, obviously believe there's complex paths out there. And our goal, as has always been the goal with a lot of what we do, is to make sure that we have the easiest way for you, our Dell community, to take advantage of technologies and the products that we have. And so in you guys thinking about how you're using these technologies, and in us thinking about how we're crafting and delivering them, here's 3 ways that we're sort of more guidelines that we apply. So the first is, and this is a lot of what I've been talking about so far, is we want to make sure with the offerings that we come up with and the way that you guys are using it, this is a tricky button thing, so sorry if I'm causing vertigo for anyone there. But essentially, it's really important when you're applying something as large and transformative and potentially disruptive, as we'll get into as cloud, to make sure that you've got a good business reason to do it. Now, you could have other motivations if you don't consider yourself a business, but think about the goal you have in doing something. And try to figure out, so if I bring this technology in and I change from my non-cloud architectures, using those 4 buckets that we looked at earlier and the idea of innovating and cutting costs, what's the plan that we have for doing this? We don't want to just willy-nilly introduce this, have sort of like a cloud in every pot. We want to make sure we actually want this cloud sprawl, if you will, and that we control this sprawling nature of things. And as an example, just one interesting example to look at it is, so if you're going to introduce self-service, right, as to your developers and to other people, you're going to want to establish governance and controls over how much the spending might be. And you might even want to pool together spending to make sure that you're doing that effectively. And I was making fun of HR firms before, but there's an interesting historic example of this. So being a big company, we have to book our travel through a centralized site. And people are constantly complaining that, like, oh, if I went directly to the airline site, it would be cheaper. Like, I can find cheaper fares on my own, and I don't have to go through this big site here. But it turns out that because we've pooled together everyone doing this use of this IT resource and the costing and everything, that at the end of the year, we can go negotiate with the company to get rebates, essentially. And so it may appear to the end user that, like, this pooling together and this centralizing of things isn't really effective, and a point-per-point thing isn't good. But basically, if you put something like this in place, you have, again, this is an example of having a business-minded way of introducing something and making sure that you're controlling the costs and governing it. And that's an area that, as a cloud strategist at Dell, I spend a lot of time thinking about. How can we make sure that we're giving you, the Dell community, these controls and governances that you need? So it's not just a bunch of command line stuff and different interfaces that you go to, but you have one centralized place to manage all of this. So the next thing is to take a pragmatic approach. And, that sounds like something you should always be doing. When should you take an impragmatic approach? It's a good question. But, what we mean by that is, and again, I'm harping back to another point, is don't feel like you need to gratuitously apply cloud, right? So you might have certain, viewpoints that say, like, if you don't switch everything over to cloud in 12 months, you're dead. And I remember over the past 3 or 4 years, I saw lots of speeches from high-profile executives at various companies that was basically that, is the cloud or die speech. And, I don't think that's extremely legit. What you want to do is find out, of all the existing IT that I have, if I have existing in the face of cloud legacy IT, what are very simple ways that I can stage out applying cloud projects to it? So, is maybe like second or third tier store archiving something that I could apply cloud to? Or is email something I could apply cloud to? Or, something we see very, very often is that essentially dev test things, scenarios, where I, as the IT department, would rather just my developers not really ever talk to me again. So it's easy to carve off the developer dev test world and very pragmatically just do that portion. And then you want to learn from each of the things that you do as you introduce cloud into your IT department. And to me, that's what a pragmatic approach is doing small things that give you feedback that allow you then to do like a small thing plus one, and then you get feedback and correct, and do a small thing plus two, and so forth and so on, versus a more dramatic way of doing things. And very much so connected to that is what we're interested in doing and helping everyone out with is doing innovation without disruption, which is more cake and eat it too, to use that cliche again, positioning. And what we mean by this is we don't want the way that cloud is applied to our community and our customer base, or to ourselves, to be frank, to be extremely disruptive. Now, like much of you guys who are running a business, we'd love to disrupt other people, right? So we want to use disruption to screw around with the competition and as my English teacher used to say, blow out their candle to make ours brighter. I mean, you always want to use disruption as a strategic tactic. But internally, you want to be nice and even-keeled and not really disrupt yourself so much. And again, in taking that pragmatic approach, there's lots of ways that you can do that with cloud. That's a great thing about cloud is, as Lou was going over, right? Like, if all of the layer cakes and the services and the boxes, like, no one really says this, but cloud is sort of like the red-headed stepchild of service-oriented architectures, right? So you've got really nicely defined services and components and layers that you can assemble together and not have to take a huge monolithic stack, if you will. And so to me, that means you can start applying it without being extremely disruptive, which is great. And as an example of this, we have this company, Intelligent Light, I believe, and they basically do design they do industrial design, which, as you can imagine, requires a lot of simulation and data crunching, if you will. So they had their engineers, working on workstations, and they were running out of capacity, or I should say, they didn't like the way they needed to keep adding capacity to do this data crunching for their simulations and industrial design. So what we did with them, along with our systems, if I remember, is we provided them an on-demand cluster to basically do that processing, a cloud way that they could burst out and do their data processing. And if you think about that, we didn't say, oh, you need to rip out your data center and completely change the way you're doing this. No, instead, we just grafted on a very non-disruptive way for them to innovate and do more processing and more work in their industrial design. And I see all sorts of possibilities like that with cloud, right? It's really easy to just slice in, which I guess is a contradictory term, but graft in functionality that's cloud-based and have it commingled and intermixed with non-cloud-based technology. So, there's no reason to be dramatically disruptive when you're applying cloud. You can instead do innovation without disruption. So here's a quote from Michael, as we call him, around Round Rock. And I think this really sums up a lot of that thinking in a nice quote. And that is that cloud is not a destination or a singular path, but a transformation that places IT squarely at the center of the enterprise as both a leader and enabler of value creation. And so if you look at that, what's going on there is basically, so instead of IT, it's always fun to play contradictions with things. So instead of IT being a value destroyer, right, being a cost center, someone who consumes money, instead IT is being an engine of growth, if you will, and something that helps the business out. And that really is a nice guiding principle that we have when we're thinking about and doing our cloud work. So this is what you could call a map or a chessboard or a very high-level overview of how we're thinking cloud integrates with the vast world of IT. And if you're looking at that and if you're saying, Coté, that looks like everything, which is cheating. You can't just put everything up there and have that and say that that's a strategy that you have. But I wrestled with that concept for quite some time. But the fact of the matter is, at the scale that Dell operates at, we're one of the largest systems companies, IT companies in the world, and the number of customers that we have, and the vast array of stuff, just raw IT stuff that our customers have, we don't really have the luxury of not focusing on everything, right? So, there's plenty of cloud people who can just focus on what classically is thought of cloud, the public multi-tenant cloud. And just providing that and driving people towards that, whether they're a SaaS or an infrastructure as a service. And there's plenty of people who could just focus on lots of little startups that are just focused on a private cloud. And there's tons of people who are focused on virtualization and just converged infrastructure. But what we see is that in order for our customers to be successful, and therefore for us to be successful, we need to focus on all of this. We can't just start hacking this stuff away and say that doesn't fit into the cloud picture. So a tremendous amount of what we're putting into our strategy and our portfolio and our products is working with all of this stuff. Now we have little bits of components everywhere across this board, and having a unified approach, being able to be the one-stop shop for all of this is very much so what our vision is. And in combining together all of this stuff, we want to make sure that we make cloud easy, accessible, affordable, and relevant to organizations of all sizes, as you can imagine. And so again, next time you're wondering what Dell is focusing on of cloud, it is pretty much everything. So, I used to go to a lot of conferences, and I guess I still do. And the talk that I just gave, I would have looked at that talk and been like, oh, so you just told me a bunch of cloudy stuff, right? Tell me some actual products and stuff that you're doing. So this may be sort of like a punishing, abusive slide to put up. It's got lots of fine print and lots of products listed. But midway through the presentation, I wanted to make sure to show you that it wasn't just a bunch of slides that we have. We actually have a tremendous amount of products that I have kind of clustered in this idea of use, build, operate, and integrate, and some other categories. And I'll give you a URL at the end that I can give you. You can contact me for more information, and I'm happy to send this along and talk with you more. But there's a couple of clusters of things amongst all of this that I want to point out in particular. And the first one is that we actually have a running public cloud that you can take your credit card right now, if the hotel or conference internet is good enough to connect to it, and you can start running some VMware-based stuff in our public cloud right away, and that's our Dell vCloud. And we've been running that for, I think, a little over a year. It might be a little over under. I always get the dates that we have something, the dates that we actually release something mixed up. So I might be slightly wrong about that. But we've been doing that for quite some time, and there's a tremendous amount of activity going on there that as an industry watcher is fascinating to watch. Like I was commenting about earlier, we have a lot of people doing dev test things, and it's interesting to talk with the people who use that cloud and see what they're doing. And the next area, we have a whole bunch of SaaS offerings. I would call them IT services like email archiving and remote management. And the Dell Cloud Business Application Suite that we have is a way of integrating together a bunch of SaaSes. But the next area that I wanted to talk about was in the operate area. And we started off, I forget however many years ago it was, is 4 or 5 if I am misremembering correctly, so to speak. And we started out with what we call DCS, or the Data Center Solutions Group. And we just shipped 1 million servers last month, but we've been providing custom-built hardware to hyperscale cloud sites. So people like Bing and eBay and other folks that don't like us to use their names, which is fine, as long as they keep buying our stuff. And what we spun out of that group was, so you've got hyperscale people who want this custom-built hardware that runs their clouds. But starting about a year ago, we found that there was another class of people who don't only want the hardware that comes out of that group, but that they wanted to have us start applying OpenStack to the cases that they need. So we put together a group of people who came out with this product Crowbar that you might be familiar with, that does bare metal installation of OpenStack. And again, this was about a year ago that we started doing this, and we've had a tremendous amount of customer interest and beyond interest, customers and people actually using it. Which is, for a startup, the ramp that we've had would be extremely shocking and encouraging. But what this group does is they come in with you and they put together, they have a reference architecture for the hardware for the private cloud you have. They'll use Crowbar to install OpenStack, and then Crowbar is also used, for example, to install Hadoop, so to install big data clusters. So we have, not only is it Hadoop that gets installed, but we also have people using it to run, we have service providers using it to run parts of their cloud, and we have people using the big data part, using it to run their Hadoop or their big data crunching clusters. So that's another interesting area that we have going on there. And in case you missed it over the last year, we've been on an acquisition spree. That's the group that I used to work in. And we picked up Weiss, which has some excellent little cloud assets in it, and Quest, which brings a whole host of system management things that are well positioned and great for doing cloud management. And I'll get into some of the security things we have in a separate slide. And we also have, so I work in the services group where we run the public cloud of and run the cloud efforts that we have. And there's a tremendous amount of just warm bodies and humans and really smart people who can come help you sort out cloud if you're interested in that as well. So again, I don't want to go through this whole thing, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't, you guys to make sure to know that it's not just a bunch of slides that we have running around in Round Rock. We actually have solid bits and products and offerings. So in sorting through that portfolio and thinking about how we apply it and how we plan it out and how we think about it, there's really these 3 pillars, if you will, that we circle all of our portfolio around, and that is principles, if you will. So we want to make sure that the cloud work we do is open, because that's in our nature to be, we've always been an open systems vendor, and we've always found that as open a possible a system as you can bring to market is ultimately beneficial and definitely delivers on that agility and innovation and cost savings that we've been going over. And the next area that we find integral to cloud strategy is the idea of integrated or integration. And this is not only data integration and application integration, but thinking about if you're managing multiple clouds or multiple pieces of IT, including clouds. If you've got a heterogeneous mixture of IT spread across on-premise, off-premise, cloud, non-cloud, not even on a network, whatever. There's a lot of integration and seamlessness that you want to introduce that we focus a tremendous deal on. And then, of course, security. We always hear from our customers and analysts and individuals and ourselves. Security is like a huge barrier to entry for cloud that you've simply got to solve, and it's really just got to be table stakes, if you will. So I wanted to dive into these 3 principles and some examples with the time that I have left. So first of all, open. So to Dell, open is an extremely important principle. If you think about the way we were started, if PCs were a welded black box commodity back in the 80s when Michael Dell started out, we probably wouldn't exist. But because PCs were open and because the whole supply chain was open, and everything was modular and componentized, we could very quickly figure out the most efficient way of getting PCs into people's hands. And that spirit of openness has carried through as we added servers to our mix, storage, networking, and last year as we added software, and definitely as we've been doing cloud work. And so, particularly when we look at cloud, just to round up some of the, we're always very interested in open cloud technologies. And so as an example of that, one of the open cloud groups that we do a lot in communities is OpenStack. And because of that crowbar-based OpenStack private cloud stuff, that group was involved with the OpenStack Foundation, from day one, and more importantly, the community, because the foundation just launched about, 60, 90 days ago. But we've been involved in the OpenStack Foundation a great deal, and things like Crowbar has been one of our primary ways of contributing to that community. So, the thought was that this is actually how one of the ways Crowbar came about it was just difficult to get OpenStack up and running. So that was one of the first things we wanted to attack, was to make it easier to get OpenStack up and running, which is how we've helped out that community. In addition to the financial investment, as we would think about it, or membership that we have, and the actual time and money that we spend with it. And another principle that we have is so as the person who works on cloud strategy for Dell, I can assure you that open is a huge component of what we're doing. We're not interested in having a proprietary platform and having it all closed source and basically being in the sense of software, a welded, shut box, if you will. We want to have as many things open as possible. And we feel that ultimately that's going to result in the efficiencies, the efficient innovation that we want to target with cloud. And then I mentioned Crowbar earlier. I mean, that's a great example of how we pulled together open technologies like Chef, for example, which is one of the little engines that runs in there, and the open technology of OpenStack and the open systems that it runs on, that open all the way down, to borrow the Turtles joke there, like essentially ensures that you can very rapidly build out things like Crowbar that let you stay in private clouds up. And there's another example that I'll quickly go over called Project Sputnik. So I help run the internal incubation program at Dell, where employees come and they pitch ideas, and we give them some funding to help develop their ideas. And we were lucky to have this guy, Barton George, pitch the first one that we accepted, Project Sputnik, which is a developer laptop. So we have a XPS 13, which is a nice small SSD loaded up laptop. It's the one that I use nowadays, and it's great. Like if you get stuck with a terrible seat on an airplane, you can actually do work, and it's not big and bulky, and it's a good little device. And coming to Dell, I had a lot of my developer friends ask me, what we were going to do to make a developer laptop, and to make a laptop that they wanted to use with Ubuntu on it, and that's exactly what Sputnik is. And there's two components that illustrate this openness, and that is we have a profile tool that is basically a way of automating setting up your build environment. So instead of going to, you join a team and they're like, hey, here's the wiki page that says how to set up your build environment. I'll see you in 3 days. Instead, our hope is to reduce that 3 days down to hours instead by using something like Chef and a combination of other open source projects to automate setting that up and extract out these profiles that does that. And then the other area that demonstrates the openness is we have something called a cloud launcher. And the idea, again, using open technologies and using OpenStack and the openness inherent in the way we think about cloud, you develop your applications on the Sputnik laptop, and as you tend to do in a developer world, you kind of simulate production on whatever workstation you have. So you just are doing that to make sure you have a quick, code, build, test cycle. And then when you're done with that and you want to deploy it to whether it's your production cloud or your QA cloud, this cloud launcher, because we're following open principles, allows you to do that more effectively. So if you're interested in Sputnik, we'll actually be launching the full-on product of that later this year. And you can go to dell.com/Sputnik. And if you want to help us test that out or join the open source communities we have in GitHub around these things, it'd be awesome. I'd really appreciate it. If you have a passion around those two ideas, then we're all about you guys coming and helping out and just poking around with that and just joining in. So I was speaking about the idea of integrated, and integrated being more than data and applications. And now, we do have this wonderful asset called Boomi, which is a cloud-based, basically a way of doing data integration. And so the brains of it, if you will, the brains of doing the data integration reside in the cloud. And of course, there's on-premise connections that you need. So there's an on-premise Atom, as they call it, or agent, or proxy, or whatever you want to say that you can install on-premise if you want. And basically, it'll do scenarios like if I'm using Salesforce and my back office ERP stuff is SAP, I got to have that stuff integrated and talk with each other. And there's all sorts of other, there's cloud to cloud and cloud to on-premise and on-premise to on-premise, and the complex nature of everything to everything. And that's what Boomi really excels at. And part of what's interesting and why it's a good touch point, other than being a cloud-based way of doing it, is because the central part of it is hosted in the cloud. There's not this, someone was asking earlier about, having managers of managers and managing the managers and all that. If you're hosting something on-premise, like as complicated as an integration thing, you need to manage that, and that's just more hassle that you have. So part of what Boomi does is takes that hassle away from you, and we manage it for you instead of you having to manage it. Now, that's just one small product example we have of this integrated idea. But what we really look at is, if you're introducing heterogeneous things, and by heterogeneous I don't mean Microsoft and Linux and Unix, heterogeneous by operating system, but I mean SaaS and cloud-based, your own custom-written applications, legacy on-premise things that aren't cloud, but you've got a heterogeneous array of stuff. That stuff needs to integrate together, at least at the management layer, if not more. Otherwise, you're going to have 10 different consoles that you need to go to manage all this stuff, which I used to write systems management software, and no one likes that. You want to have the console of consoles and have just one place to do things. So that's a kind of integrate that we spend a lot of time looking at. And from that, as I was flying to before, once you integrate things together, it's easier to have control over it. And to go back to Boomi, there's a good example with the One World Alliance, which is an airline frequent flyer program amongst American Airlines and British Air, if I remember, and Cathay, and a whole bunch of other people. I should probably remember because that's the folks that I fly with. But if you think about the integration challenges that they have, they've got lots of data flowing back and forth. Like miles you earn on one carrier apply to another carrier, apply to your flight frequent flyer qualification. So there's tons of data flowing back and forth across lots of different systems and different geographies, across 14 countries and 12 carriers and all sorts of time zones, not to mention different file formats, and sometimes it's a file, sometimes it's an API, all sorts of things like that. And managing that, as you can imagine, not easy. So they came to use Boomi for it, and they got the benefits of not having to manage the integration thing. And also, because of all of the integration technology already built into Boomi, and again, because it was cloud-based and it operated in a cloud function, they were able to reduce down the amount of time it took to integrate partners and to do this processing from months down to days. And that's the kind of, again, generalizing from that principle, those are the kind of statements that you want to find from cloud, is you want a huge reduction in the amount of time things take. And that's why something like Boomi is a great example of providing that. So finally, a core principle that we have with cloud is that it needs to be secure. Now, to use my sort of rhetoric of contradictions, if you think about it, you're like, I've never heard someone say, hey, I want the insecure cloud. Of course your cloud has to be secure. That's just table stakes, as we would say. And so with that kind of thinking, when we're building our cloud, we really like to bake in security to the cloud and make it something, again, focusing on it being simple, something that you don't really need to worry about. And in addition to partnerships with people like Trend Micro and other people, we actually we bought these two companies over the past few years that we're integrating tightly into the cloud portfolio that we have. We have SecureWorks, which is an extremely highly regarded MSSP or MSS, depending if you want the P at the end. And they're just a bunch of white hat hackers and other people who I'm not meaning to sort of put down what they do, but they make sure that the systems that you're running are secure and not hackable. And that's a combination of technology that we have and the great people who run SecureWorks for us. And it really is this great asset. If you think about it, if you're going to be in the business as we are of providing cloud, public cloud and managed cloud, and cloud that's running off of the internet, it's a great asset to have that we have these security folks in-house that are just woven into the way we do cloud. And like I said, whenever you get cloud from us, that and also assets from SonicWall, you can depend on us intelligently pulling those things into the cloud assets that we have. So with SonicWall, for example, they have these great boxes that basically they're unified UTM boxes, unified threat management things, and they basically pull together a whole bunch of security function into one box, your firewall and various other functionality that you have, VPN and things like that. And that's another area where, because we have all this security know-how and technology in-house, it's very easy for us to start applying it to the cloud offerings that we have and have that nice all-inclusive way of doing cloud. So with that, hopefully that gives you an idea of how we think about cloud and how we're structuring the strategy that we have with cloud and the kind of like mind-boggling portfolio of cloud things that we already have, and how you can start looking to us and thinking about us as a trusted advisor to help you out applying cloud, and whether you just want to be more efficient in your cost savings with cloud, or you want to start changing the way you do your business and actually being a positive revenue increasing force in your business. I think there's a lot that not only cloud has to offer for you, but the way that what Dell has to offer for you. And there's plenty of fun numbers here. I mean, the one I like the most is the one in the middle, which speaks to the length of time that we've been involved in cloud and the expertise that we've built up and the trust that we have with hardcore cloud people. And that is that we've, like I said earlier, we've shipped 1 million servers into hyperscale and cloud-based environments. And there's plenty of other things that we've been involved in, like in the upper right-hand corner, we have this cloud-based service called Insight One that's works in the healthcare sector. And instead of people having to host their own huge medical images, they can host it in our very secure and compliant cloud environment. And you can see there's 1 million+ integrations that we've done with Boomi and so forth and so on. So with that, if you want to get more information, you can go to that URL there and just fill out the form, and I'll follow up with you and discuss things with you and send you whatever information or connect you with folks that you need. But thanks very much, and there's a few minutes left for questions.
There are indeed some minutes. Oh, look, applause, spontaneous applause. We like that.